This devotional style of Bible study, for me, has been the most amazing thing. I'm really looking for two things when I'm reading a passage of Scripture. What is there to learn about me? And what is there to learn about God? Sometimes he gives me one, sometimes he gives me the other, sometimes he gives both. Today, it's an unsettling revelation about me. And I'll share that at the end of the devotional time. But I'm amazed at how relevant God has made the Word of God to me. And I hope you're getting something from it. But please, again, as I've said before, this devotional is all about me. I don't have you in mind at all. This isn't me trying to teach you anything. This is Paige trying to teach Paige something. I want my life to be better today than it was yesterday. I want to be a better man of God today than I was yesterday, and I want to be a better man of God tomorrow than I am today. That's the whole purpose of this. So if you get anything from it, God's blessings to you. But just know that I'm not doing this for you. So, having said that, get your coffee and your Bible and join me as I think with my mouth open. Here's my coffee. And they all said, in the beginning, coffee, and lo, it was very good. All right, chapter 18, the Absalom Conspiracy, part 5, the end of it all. This is where the rubber meets the road for Absalom. Absalom has looked the part. He's talked himself into being king. He's won the hearts of the people through his politicking and his speechifying. And now he has to finish what he started. In essence, he has to go kill his father. He has to defeat his father David in the battlefield. He has a superior army. He's king, currently king, and his father's no longer king. And he has everything on his side of the table except one very important asset: knowing what to do in a fight. I just finished watching a series on YouTube, and I'm always amused by this. This is a series where they film people who walk into a dojo, an MMA dojo or something like that, and they challenge the fighters there. Sometimes they even challenge the head instructor there because they think they're something. They're a street fighter, and they go in there and they're going to show that karate is nothing or boxing is nothing, or that, they're really full of themselves. And they step into a dojo and challenge a fighter. And every one of these videos I've seen, they get their butts handed to them. And they discover that in their mind, they're great. But in reality, not so much. They had built up this image of themselves in their own mind. And they built up a narrative in their own mind where this karate or jiu-jitsu or whatever the discipline is can't stand up in a real street fight. Yeah. Good luck with that. Well, that's kind of what's happening here. Absalom has somehow convinced himself that he is a warrior king, and he has to go out and defeat David on the battlefield. And the missing element is the fact that he's no warrior. He's not a warrior king. David, on the other hand, his father, is tried and tested. David is an excellent tactician, an excellent general, and he has good generals working for him. And he knows who to listen to. Absalom does not know who to listen to. If you remember in the previous chapter, when he asked for advice about how to handle David, Ahithophel, who had been David's senior counselor, who David and supposedly Absalom considered his counsel as being from God himself, he advised Absalom, go get David now while he's on the run. Don't let him get settled. Don't let him get set. Get him now. Kill him now, and the kingdom will be yours. But then he goes and listens to a lesser experienced counselor, who, by the way, was a plant by David. And this guy says, no. David, let David, David is wary, and he's a skilled warrior, and it might cause you problems. Look, take your time and gather up all the men in Israel that you can get and go after him in massive numbers and just swarm him and to put him down. he listened to the younger, inexperienced guy, who, by the way, was a plant by David, and Ahithophel's advice went to the wayside. So Absalom has no idea of being able to discern wise counsel from unwise counsel. We're going to find out today that David does not have a problem with wise counsel, and that he has surrounded himself with wise people, especially in regards to the upcoming battle. So let's get started. Chapter 18. David mustered the men who were with him and appointed of them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. David sent out his troops, a third under the command of Joab, a third under Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and a third under Ittai the Gittite. Now this is interesting. This is another example of David's leadership skills. We all know that David and the Philistines were enemies, right? We all know that David and the Philistines were enemies. Here, hang on a second. Let me fix this. All right. There we go. I have to fix something here real quick. There we are there. All right, what do we got here? Why do we have this? There we go. There we are. There we are. Okay. This is amazing. And this is an example of David's leadership. David, Israel, and the Philistines have been sworn enemies. And yet here's a Philistine in David's employ as one of his chief generals. This should tell you something about the respect that David, the warrior king, has garnered among people, even among people from his enemies. And Ittai the Gittite is one of his major generals. This is leadership, that even among his enemies, David is given so much respect that Ittai the Gittite eventually becomes one of his major generals. Just a thought. Now, the king told the troops, I myself will surely march out with you. But the men said, you must not go out. If we're forced to flee, they won't care about us. Even if half of us die, they won't care. But you are worth 10,000 of us. It would be better now for you to give us support from the city. All right. The counsel of his generals is that, David, don't go with us. First of all, if we die, no big deal. But if you die, it's all over. We can't take that chance. Plus, there's an underlying thought here, and I can see the wisdom. This is what I would be thinking. David is going to war with his son. And there's a very real chance that David's army might kill David's son. David has shown that he loves Absalom. Now, Absalom doesn't love David, but David loves Absalom. And you can see perhaps they might be concerned the fact that David might hesitate. You can't hesitate in the battlefield. Someone who's instinctively so good at it as David works best when he's acting instinctively. But with the son involved, his instincts might be blunted and he might hesitate, and you can't hesitate in battle. So you can see the wisdom in his counselor saying, no, David, you stay home. You stay back here. We'll take care of this. And here's the difference between David and Absalom. Look at David's response. The king answered, I will do whatever is best to you. Exactly. David listens to his counselors, unlike Absalom. David knows who to listen to, and he listens to them and takes their advice. Just because he's the king doesn't mean that he has to make all the decisions. He's surrounded himself with good people, and he's listening to them. So the king stood beside the gate while his men marched out in units of hundreds and thousands. The king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, and he told them, be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. And all the troops heard the king giving orders concerning Absalom to each of the commanders. Don't kill my son. That's what he's saying. Be gentle with him. David's army marched out of the city to fight Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. There, Israel's troops, Absalom, were routed by David's men, and the casualties that day were great, 20,000 in all. And the battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the force swallowed up more men that day than the sword. Okay, this was Absalom's moment to show what kind of a king he was, what kind of a military man he was, and it turns out he's no military man at all. When General Schwarzkopf was involved with, I think it was Operation Desert Storm, and he was fighting against Saddam Hussein, somebody asked him what he thought of the military acumen of Saddam Hussein and his army, and his response was something along the lines of, says, I don't think of it at all because he's no military man. He's no challenge. I don't have to defeat a military mind. He totally disregarded Saddam Hussein, and it turned out Saddam Hussein was no military man. He was a dictator. He always had his way, and he had this view of himself that was totally out of touch with reality. That's kind of Absalom here. Absalom has a chance, and he blew it. David picked the terrain that they fought on. It was uneven terrain. There was trees, there was forest, and it says here that Israel's troops were routed. The battle spread out over the whole countryside. In other words, the army was stretched out, and they were in the forest, and there was valleys and crevices and little canyons. David picked the scene where the battles take place, and David's smaller, more nimble army was able to absolutely destroy Absalom's army. When push came to shove, Absalom showed that he was not made of the same stuff as his father David. Yeah, there's something to be said about messing with an old man. I heard somebody say once, don't get in a fight with an older man because he won't fight fair. And Absalom pushed the issue, and David avoided the issue as long as he could. But when a push came to shove, finally, they had to go to war. David picked the terrain, and Absalom's army was totally overmatched and destroyed. Now, Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's hair got caught in the tree. He was left hanging in midair while the mule he was riding kept on going. Again, this is not the action of a trained military man. This is the action of an absolute rookie, and he's no warrior. His hair gets caught in the tree branches, and the mule he's riding just walks out from underneath him. The mule he was riding kept on going. Now, it's probably they were fleeing, and so the mule just kept on going and left Absalom hanging there. And one of the men saw what happened. He told Joab, I just saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree. Joab said to the man who told him this, what? You saw him? Why didn't you strike him to the ground right there? Then I would have had to give you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt. Apparently, Joab had put a reward out. But the important thing is here, Joab appears to have no qualms whatsoever disobeying David's express command where he said, be gentle with my son. This is gonna doom Joab. Joab is very, very he's rash, and he's a bully. You know, we said earlier in the story here that David, when he became king, he was afraid of Joab. Joab was his nephew, and Joab was a very capable general, but Joab had a temper apparently, and he was rash, and I don't know what the deal was, but David never got rid of him. Maybe David decided to keep him close because he was a good general, but I don't know. David was concerned about Joab, and we're going to see that later in the story of David. But right now, we see that Joab doesn't care a whit about David's commands about Absalom. But the man replied, even if 1,000 shekels were weighed out into my hands, I would not lay a hand on the king's son. In our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, protect the young man Absalom for my sake. And if I had put my life in jeopardy, and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have kept your distance from me. So he said, if I killed him, you're not going to stand up for me, so I'm not going to kill him. Joab said, I'm not going to wait for like this for you. So he took 3 javelins in his hand, and he plunged them into Absalom's heart, while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And then 10 of Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. Then Joab sounded the trumpet, and the troops stopped pursuing Israel, for Joab halted them. They took Absalom, threw him into a big pit in the forest, and piled up a large heap of rocks over him. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled to their homes. By the way, this is how they would bury criminals in those days, I understand. Such burial was often reserved for criminals or enemies of the state. During his lifetime, Absalom had taken a pillar and erected it in the King's Valley as a monument to himself because he said, I don't have any sons to carry on the memory of my name. He named the pillar after himself, and it's called Absalom's Monument to this day. In life, Absalom had envisioned for himself a king's career and had erected a pillar of remembrance in his own honor. In death, he was branded a traitor and buried under a pile of stones. Now Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said, let me run and take the news to the king that the Lord has vindicated him by delivering him from the hand of his enemies. Oh, you're not the one to take the news today, Joab told him. You may take the news another time, but you must not do so today because the king's son is dead. Now, see, even Joab knows that whoever brings this news to David is in danger because they had acted against David's command and had killed Absalom. Then Joab said to a Cushite, go tell the king what you've seen. The Cushite bowed down before Joab and ran off. Slick move on Joab's part. He sent a non-Jewish professional soldier to give David the news. Let David get mad at the Cushite rather than sending an Israelite that might potentially die because of the news. There's every chance that David might kill the messenger over this. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, again said to Joab, come what may, please let me run behind the Cushite. Joab replied, my son, why do you want to go? You don't have any news that will bring you a reward. And he said, come what may, I want to run. So Joab said, run. And Ahimaaz ran by way of the plain and outran the Cushite. He knew a shorter path. So while David was sitting between the inner and outer gates, the watchman went up on the roof of the gateway by the wall. And as he looked out, he saw a man running alone. And as the watchman called out to the king and reported it, the king said, if he's alone, he must have good news. And the runner came closer and closer. Then the watchman saw another runner, and he called down to the gatekeeper, look, another man is running alone. King said, well, he must be bringing good news too. The watchman said, it seems to me that the first one runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok. He's a good man, said the king. He comes with good news. Then Ahimaaz called out to the king, all is well. He bowed down before the king with his face to the ground and said, praise be to the Lord your God. He has delivered up those who lifted their hands against my lord the king. The king asked the question, is the young man Absalom safe? Ahimaaz answered, I saw great confusion just as Joab was about to send the king's servant to me, and me, your servant, but I don't know what it was. The king said, stand aside and wait here. So he stepped aside, and he stood there. Then the Cushite arrived and said, my lord the king, hear the good news. The Lord has vindicated you today by delivering you from the hand of all who rose up against you. The king asked the Cushite, is the young man Absalom safe? The Cushite replied, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up to harm you be like that young man. In other words, dead. The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept, and as he went, he said, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. In spite of all the harm that Absalom had caused, this was David's response. In spite of the fact that Absalom came out to kill David, meet him in the battlefield, this is David's response. His anguish at the loss of his son is amazing. But it also reveals something about the heart of David. He was not a perfect man, obviously not a perfect father, because his son hated him enough they wanted to kill him. But in spite of all the harm that Absalom caused, David still cared, still loved him. As a father, I can't think of anything more heart-wrenching than to be at odds with your son. There have been a couple times when my son and I have not seen eye to eye on something, and at times got a little heated. And to be honest, those times broke my heart. Think about this. He had to go to war with his own son, in a war where death of either of them was a very real possibility, and Absalom indeed died during war. And David is absolutely crushed. Now, put yourself in David's shoes a second here. Put yourself in David's shoes for a second. Think about this. He had his wife taken from him, Saul's daughter. He married her. Apparently there was a relationship there. They loved each other. She cared for him. She helped him escape. And Saul took her from him. Then David's out running around in the wilderness, and he starts getting married. He married Abigail. He married several other, by the time he becomes king, he has 8 wives, I think. And he has a number of children, daughters. His daughter Tamar, she gets raped by another one of his sons, who is a half-brother to Tamar, Amnon. Amnon gets killed. So there's a son of David that gets killed. Who kills him? Another one of his sons. Absalom is, I think, at least one of 5 sons that gets killed of David. Abigail had other sons and they died. And David has at least, and then there's 3 sons. So it's Absalom, Amnon. David has survived multiple deaths of sons and daughters. My sister died brutally, a brutal death. And I remember talking with my dad about that. I was 5 years old when it happened, and my younger brother and I apparently witnessed it. And I say apparently because we both had flashback memory segments that just come out of nowhere, and we really believe we saw what happened. But it was such a traumatic experience that, huge chunks of it are just blocked out. But I asked my dad on the golf course, we were golfing once, I said, Dad, how did you and Mom ever get over what happened to our sister Phyllis? He says, what makes you think we ever got over it? A parent doesn't get over it when their children die before them. Think of the grief and think of the incredible anguish in David's life. By my count, perhaps as many as 5 sons are dead. Daughters raped and dead or dead. And then David has to go to battle. David has to go to battle with his son, his eldest son at that time. And I can't think of a more angst-filled world than David's world at this point. David is a very flawed man. Duh, who isn't? And he has a heart for God. He returns to God. He always turns to God. Even when he sinned, he doesn't allow his sin to keep him from turning to God. Many people, when they sin, they run away from God. They don't want anything to do with God because they sinned. David sins, and yet he still returns to God. He's a man who's pursuing God. But again, he's a very flawed individual. He's a warrior king. He has blood on his hands like nobody else. And in this case, his army killed his own son. I'm not surprised at this incredible outbreak of grief from David. You can just see him going, again? Another son gone? His first child with Bathsheba dead. It's horrific. But here we are. Absalom is gone now. Absalom's army is defeated. Absalom has been found out to be the fact that he is primarily a faker. He was a sham. He was in love with the idea of being a king, but he wasn't, in fact, a good king at all. Apparently, he was even in love with the idea of being a warrior. He was no warrior. He tried to take out his father, and his father, who is a warrior and a brilliant tactician, ordered the battleground. He set the place for the battle to take place and totally crushed his son's army. Now, I promised before that I was going to share something revelatory about me. And this was actually quite humbling because I want to identify with David. I want to identify with David, the underdog who takes on the giant and defeats Goliath. I want to identify with David, the brilliant military tactician who destroys armies and is such a great leader that he even attracts leaders from his nation's mortal enemies, Philistia. I want to be so much like David, but the truth is, I think I have at least as much in common with Absalom. I'd made mention of the fact before that I got fired from an engineering job. I was a manager in a network engineering group in a major satellite company. And I had campaigned for that job to be manager of that group. I had been a member of that engineering group, and I campaigned to be the manager of it. I presented my case before my superiors, and I pushed for it. I campaigned for it. I talked the talk. I looked the stuff. I had the respect of the men that worked for me, and they promoted me to being manager. And when it got to the point of being manager, I had not counted the cost. And it turned out I was a pretty poor manager. I talked like I knew what I was doing. I presented myself as someone who knew what he was doing. And when the time came to be an actual manager of this group, I wasn't very effective. And as a result, I got fired. That is Absalom. He talked the talk. He looked the part. He looked good. He sounded good. But when battle came, he was not the man he'd presented himself to be. And I have tried for years since that time to put some blame on that company for firing me. But the truth is, in that regard, I was captain of my own ship, and it was my fault. And if I had been them, I would have fired me. And that's humbling to realize that I have at least as much in common with Absalom as I do with David. In fact, I really don't have much in common with David. I'm more of an Absalom kind of guy. Now, since then, I've learned that lesson, by the way. And this isn't the first time God has revealed that part of me to me. But it's the first time I've come across a Bible character that reflects so accurately what I felt in my heart. I want to be like David in the sense that I want to return to God. I want to be a man after God's own heart, that even when I sin, I turn to him. And I think I've learned that lesson. I know I'm better at it now than I used to be. And as I grow older in the Lord, I like to think I'm becoming more like David and less like Absalom. But there's an important lesson there. Absalom is a case study of someone who, all right, this might sound kind of crude, but this is what my dad used to say. Absalom is a case study of someone whose mouth wrote a check that his butt could not cash. I hope that doesn't offend, but that's my dad. Well, we've wrapped up Absalom and David, and now we're going to shift our focus toward the latter part of David's reign, and we'll see what he's got going on there. All right. Until next time, this is Paige. Here's my coffee. And lo, it's still very good. I'm out of here, folks. Have a great day. Bye-bye.